Hi, hello everyone. Welcome back to my channel. Today let's talk about the famous African writer, Nadine Gordimer. Nadine Gordimer, 1923-2014. Nadine Gordimer is one of the most prominent voices in African literature. She is considered a moral conscience of South African letters. She was born in 1923 in Springs, Transvaal, now Gauteng, South Africa. Daughter of Jewish immigrants, her father was a Lithuanian watchmaker and her mother was from London. Gordimer grew up in a racially segregated mining town. Her early awareness of inequality and injustice deeply influenced her writing. She attended a Catholic convent school and briefly studied at the University of Witwatersrand, Wits, before leaving to pursue writing. She began writing at the age of 9, publishing her first short story at the age of 15. Her early works appeared in local journals and magazines such as New Yorker, Harper's, and the New York Review of Books. Her famous works includes the novels The Lying Days, 1953, is a semi-autobiographical debut work. A World of Strangers, 1958, explored interracial relationships. The Late Bourgeois World, 1966, The Conservationist, 1974, and this work is a co-winner of the Booker Prize. Burger's Daughter, 1979, inspired by anti-apartheid activist named Ruth First. The next work, July's People, 1981, is a controversial dystopian vision of post-apartheid South Africa. My Son's Story, 1990, about a mixed-race family during apartheid. The Pickup, 2001, where it explores immigration and their identity. No Time Like the Present, 2012, her last novel, dealing with the post-apartheid challenges. Now let's have a look at the short story collections written by Nadine Gordimer. First of all, Face to Face, 1949, 6 Feet of the Country, 1956, Jump and Other Stories, 1991, Loot and Other Stories, 2003. Over 200 short stories were published during her lifetime. Now let's have a look at the themes and literary styles in Nadine Gordimer's works. Central themes include institutional racism and apartheid, moral and political conflicts among liberal whites, gender and sexuality in a racially segregated society, post-colonial identity, exile and alienation, interracial relationships and social taboos, power dynamics, class and resistance. Now let's have a look at the literary style of Nadine Gordimer. Nadine Gordimer is known for psychological depth, subtle irony, and a narrative restraint. Often blurred the line between fiction and a political essay. Wrought in a realist mode with a strong ethical and political undertones. Influenced by European modernists and African oral tradition. Now the awards and honors. Nadine Gordimer won Nobel Prize for Literature in 1991. The Nobel Committee quote, "Her magnificent epic writing has, in our words of Alfred Nobel, been of very great benefit to humanity." She won Booker Prize in 1974 for the work The Conservationist, and she shared this award that year with Stanley Middleton. She has also won Commonwealth Writers' Prize, James Tate Black Memorial Prize, and other global honors. She received more than 15 honorary doctorates from institutions like Harvard, Yale, Oxford, and Cambridge. Now let's have a look at the political engagement and activism of Nadine Gordimer. She was an outspoken critic of apartheid. Her writings were banned in South Africa during much of the 1960s and 1980s. She was the friend and supporter of Nelson Mandela. She was among the few allowed to visit him during his imprisonment. She was a long-time ally of the African National Congress (ANC). She opposed censorship, state violence, and racial injustice. She defended freedom of expression, particularly in literature and the arts. She was also engaged with global human rights and the HIV/AIDS awareness later in life. Now the legacy and influence of Nadine Gordimer. Her work contributed to a global understanding of life under apartheid. She continues to be taught in courses on post-colonial literature, feminism, and African studies. She inspired a generation of writers and activists, especially female writers of color. She left behind an enduring body of work that bridges the gap between art and political engagement. Now let's have a detailed look at the main works of Nadine Gordimer and the themes. First one, The Lying Days, 1953. This semi-autobiographical debut novel follows Helen Shaw, a white South African woman awakening to the injustices of apartheid. Set in a small mining town and later in a city university, it traces her emotional and moral development. Nadine Gordimer explores themes of racial ignorance, personal awakening, and the burden of privilege. The next work, that is A World of Strangers, 1958. The character Toby Hood, a British businessman, navigates the racial and cultural divides of 1950s Johannesburg. His relationships with both the black South Africans and the liberal whites expose the city's stark inequalities. The novel critiques liberal detachment and the failure of well-meaning outsiders to truly understand or change systemic oppression. The next work, Occasion for Loving, 1963. A forbidden interracial love affair between a white woman and a black African artist unfolds in apartheid-era South Africa. The novel examines how personal relationships are strained and often doomed by oppressive social structures. Gordimer uses this love story to highlight the cost of apartheid on emotional freedom and a human connection. The next work, The Late Bourgeois World, 1966. This novella follows the character Liz, a liberal white woman, reflecting on her failed marriage and her involvement in the anti-apartheid movement after her activist husband committed suicide. Set against the backdrop of political unrest, Liz's internal struggle mirrors the larger societal paralysis. Nadine Gordimer critiques white liberalism and the illusion of neutrality in the face of injustice. The next work, A Guest of Honor, 1970. The character James Bray, a British administrator, returning to our newly independent African country, finds himself entangled in a political instability. The novel explores post-colonial identity, betrayal, and the complexities of liberation movements. Gordimer dissects the lingering effects of colonialism and the difficulties of achieving true freedom. The next work, The Conservationist, 1974. The character marrying a wealthy white industrialist owns a farm he neither understands nor truly values, and discovers a dead body buried on the land. The novel is a powerful metaphor for apartheid South Africa, where land ownership is disconnected from indigenous presence. Nadine Gordimer critiques capitalist exploitation and ecological and spiritual disconnection. The next work, Berger's Daughter, 1979. The character Rosa Berger, the daughter of martyred anti-apartheid activists, must come to terms with her legacy and her own political identity. Torn between public expectation and a private desire, she navigates a world structured with ideological tensions. The novel explores themes of political inheritance, selfhood, and the personal cost of resistance. The next work, Jule's People, 1981. When a violent revolution erupts, a liberal white family flees the city and it takes refuge with the former black servant, Julie. The reversal of roles in the rural village destabilizes the assumed authority and a liberal guilt. Nadine Gordimer imagines a future upheaval to critique both the system of apartheid and the limitations of white liberalism. The next work, Something Out There, 1984. This short story collection contains deeply political and personal tales, including a symbolic story about a mysterious creature stalking Johannesburg. The stories examine paranoia, repression, and human resilience in apartheid South Africa. Nadine Gordimer blends realism and allegory to reflect societal anxiety and survival. The next work, My Son's Story, 1990. A colored school teacher named Swanee leads a double life as both a family man and a political activist, and is discovered by his son to be having an affair. Told partly from the son's perspective, the novel examines betrayal, idealism, and moral complexity. It captures the deep interweaving of private lives and political commitments under apartheid. The next work, Jump and Other Stories, 1991. This collection of 16 stories spans apartheid and post-apartheid contexts, showing the disorientation and contradictions of life in a transition. Characters grapple with fear, loss, memory, and a change in various settings. Nadine Gordimer offers a nuanced, often disquieting look at the cost of political and personal transformation. The next work, None to Accompany Me, 1994. The character Vera Stark, a white female lawyer and a political activist, navigates the shifting moral terrain of a newly democratic South Africa. As the country transitions, so too must Vera confront her aging body, her activism, and her relationships. The novel reflects on the ambiguity of progress and the need for personal and a national reinvention. The next work, The House Gun, 1998. A white liberal couple's son is arrested for murdering his roommate in a jealous rage, prompting a legal and emotional reckoning. The novel explores guilt, justice, sexuality, and the meaning of violence in a post-apartheid society. Nadine Gordimer delves into the collapse of all the moral certainties and the search for accountability. The next work, The Pickup, 2001. Julie, a white South African woman, falls in love with Ibrahim, an illegal Arab immigrant, and follows him to his impoverished desert home. Their journey explores immigration, cultural dislocation, and identity beyond race and class. Nadine Gordimer questions notions of belonging and the boundaries that define the idea of home. The next work, Loot and Other Stories, 2003. This story collection offers 10 richly layered stories that range from meditations on death and wealth to critiques of globalization and conflict. The title story, Loot, is a post-tsunami parable, reflects on greed and immortality. Nadine Gordimer uses allegory and realism to critique power in its many forms. The next work, Get a Life, in 2005. The person, Paul Bannerman, an environmentalist, undergoes radiation treatment and is isolated due to radioactive contamination. This forced retreat prompts existential and familial introspection. The novel subtly critiques environmental destruction and the ironic distance between activism and everyday life. The next work, Beethoven was 1/60th Black and Other Stories, 2007. These stories span continents and histories, linking personal identity with a collective memory and post-colonial entanglements. The title story, that is, Beethoven was 1/60th Black, features a South African academic exploring possible Black ancestry. Nadine Gordimer uses genealogy as a metaphor for political and a historical awareness. The next work, Telling Times, Writing and a Living, 1954-2008, published in 2010. A definitive non-fiction collection of essays, interviews, speeches, and personal reflections spanning over 5 decades. It charts South Africa's journey through apartheid and beyond through Nadine Gordimer's perspective. The book offers deep insights into her intellectual and moral evolution. The next work, No Time Like the Present, 2012. Stephen and Jabulal, an interracial couple and a former anti-apartheid activist, struggle to find a purpose in the new South Africa. The novel critiques corruption, inequality, and the erosion of revolutionary ideals in the post-liberation era. Nadine Gordimer offers a sobering, reflective portrayal of hope turned to disillusionment. The next work, Living in Hope and History, Notes from Our Century, 1999. This non-fiction volume collects speeches, essays, and personal reflections on literature, politics, and justice. It captures Nadine Gordimer's voice as both a writer and activist, chronicling events from apartheid's peak to Nelson Mandela's presidency. The book is a testament to her belief in literature as a moral force in society.